Thank you.
Theme for the next part of our morning, and again we've filled up completely. So wonderful to see so many of you interested in this track. I think it is so critical for us socially, so really encouraging. So next up, I'm delighted to hand over to my Psyched partner Ben McKie for A Trip Too Far. One of the key ingredients that we've found really in maintaining overall physical mental health for our programme and our participants in our Psyched programmes is to work with real cutting edge, pioneering practitioners who are doing incredible things in their own specialisms, and we have to constantly seek and find them all the time. So I'm personally very excited to hear that Ben's guest today has to say. The work that he and his team are doing could be a real game changer. However, I don't want to steal Ben's thunder, so Ben, over to you for the introductions.
Good morning and welcome to today's Psych session, A Trip Too Far, or is it? All shall be revealed. My name is Ben McKie. I'm a consultant psychotherapist and the co-founder of Psych Global. And at this moment I'm still part apple, Kath. I was an apple that likes to be tugged. Sorry, I couldn't resist it. Having been a clinician for the best part of 20 years, I've encountered many people that are on prescribed medications for a variety of different mood disorders. And in my experience, this medication isn't quite hitting the mark. It isn't cutting the mustard, so to speak. Along with this, often medications come with side effects which you will then need to take additional medication for. So in my opinion, there's only one winner here, and that's actually the pharmaceutical companies that are making these drugs. Now, I'm not saying that medication doesn't have its place, it clearly does, but what I'm seeing is medication being overly prescribed, and I believe that's to do with the stigma that still surrounds mental health today. Now, we all are socially conditioned, and we all have our own conscious and unconscious biases. And often in my work, both clinically and working with executives, these processes that impede growth and development, they really obstruct us and get in our way. So much of what we describe as our perception of the world is often actually a preconditioned response to a past life experience. So how we see things is often more about how we are. So with this in mind, if we change the way we look at things, the things we look at will change. And in my experience, to initiate and create change, we need to alter perspective and go beyond the established norms and ways of doing things. So my request to you all this morning is that you put away your preconceived socially conditioned selves and remain open for this session so you can hear about the amazing groundbreaking work that Dr Robin Carhart-Harris and his team from Imperial College are currently working on. Please give a warm welcome to Robin.
Well, thank you very much, Ben. It's a real pleasure to be here. So, mental illness. Mental illness is the most burdensome of all the major categories of illness. It affects at least 1 in 4 adults in the UK, costs the UK economy an estimated £100 billion every year, and is the major cause of life years lost to disability. Despite the immensity of this problem, mental health research receives only about 5% of the total annual UK health research spending. It has to be said that despite a steady increase in the severity of the burden of mental illness, psychiatry's performance in terms of its ability to effectively treat mental illness hasn't been good enough. Prescription rates of psychiatric medications increase year on year at record levels, but this does not appear to be solving the problem. Leading the way in terms of burden is depression. It's the #1 burden of disease in Europe. It's also a leading cause of lost work productivity and is associated with several thousand suicides in the UK every year. Tragically, many suicide victims are young, and young men especially. Suicide is now the leading cause of premature death among men under the age of 45 in the UK. Perhaps due to stigma and shame, many people suffering from mental illness go untreated, but almost all of those who do receive institutional care do so via medications prescribed to them by their doctors. Antidepressant prescription rates have more than doubled in this country in the last decade. About 65 million prescriptions were issued in England in 2016. The leading medications for depression are the selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, or SSRIs. These are Prozac-like drugs like citalopram or Celexa. And contrary to what's been said in the past by some people, these drugs aren't mere placebos. They block the removal of an important chemical messenger in the brain, serotonin, allowing its levels to accumulate. How SSRIs work isn't fully understood, but the moderation of stress and emotion seems to be a component of it. When this is combined with the right level of psychosocial support, an SSRI-treated individual may find it easier to cope. But whether SSRIs are sufficiently effective is a complex question. A recent large meta-analysis has shown that treatment with SSRIs is associated with a greater decrease in depressive symptoms than treatment with placebo, but response is still incomplete in at least half of people treated with their first SSRIs. SSRIs also take weeks to work and are associated with a range of different side effects. They're also not easy to come off, and they appear to have an ambiguous effect on suicidality, something you wouldn't naturally expect from an antidepressant. So how can we do better than this? The typical place people turn to when considering this question is psychotherapy. However, psychotherapy isn't readily available within our overstretched public healthcare system. Waiting lists are long, and conventional therapies such as cognitive behavioral therapy or CBT can often feel too superficial to get to the root of the problem. Added to this, conventional psychotherapies appear to be no more effective than SSRIs and are more resource demanding, which is the major reason why medications dominate the current system. But will they always? Psychiatry is currently undergoing a quiet revolution. Entrepreneurs have begun investing several millions of dollars into a large multi-site trial across Europe and the US, encompassing 10 countries and over 400 patients. It's informed and guided by the advice of the medicines regulators of Europe and the US, as well as significant thought leaders in psychiatry, including the former head of the European Psychiatric Association, former head of the American Psychiatric Association, and former head of the US National Institute of Mental Health. So what is this trial? It's to test the safety and efficacy of psilocybin therapy for treatment-resistant depression. And what is psilocybin? It's a naturally occurring compound found in so-called magic mushrooms. The psychedelic revolution in mental health care is coming. I can see it, and I'll tell you about it. That psilocybin has healing potential isn't new news for some indigenous cultures of this world, who records suggest have been using psilocybin-containing mushrooms for millennia. Discovered by modern science in 1958, psilocybin enjoyed a brief dalliance with mainstream psychiatry, before political interference effectively quashed this research before any firm conclusions could be drawn about it. Human research with psychedelics was revived in Switzerland, Germany, and the US in the mid to late 1990s, and the first modern clinical trial with psilocybin was conducted in the US in 2006, assessing psilocybin for obsessive-compulsive disorder. Also in 2006, a remarkable paper was published by a team at Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore. They reported a double-blind study in which the effects of a single high dose of psilocybin were compared with those of Ritalin. The scientists found that psilocybin induced profound transformative experiences in most of the volunteers. Remarkably, over half of them rated their experience with psilocybin as being among the most meaningful experiences of the whole of their lives. The team also found evidence of long-term improvements in mental well-being that were evident over 1 year on from the participants' single 4 to 5 hour experience with psilocybin. I began my own research with psilocybin towards the end of my PhD in 2008, conducting a series of brain imaging studies that led to an MRC-supported clinical trial assessing the safety and efficacy of psilocybin for treatment-resistant depression. The sample for this trial comprised of mostly severely depressed patients. They tried on average 4 to 5 different antidepressants without response, and some as many as 11. The average duration of these individuals' depressions was 17 years. And yet, remarkably, all of the trial participants showed some decrease in their depressive symptoms at 1 week after the psilocybin therapy. Half were in remission at 3 weeks, meaning they're effectively depression-free, and significant effects remained at 6 and now 12 months. Subsequent larger control studies have found similar effects with psychedelics for end-of-life anxiety, also depression, and others have shown positive outcomes with psilocybin for alcohol dependence and tobacco addiction. While MDMA therapy is showing promise for post-traumatic stress disorder, recently achieving breakthrough therapy status with the FDA in the US. A common principle in all of this work is that the therapeutic effect of psychedelics is highly dependent on the context in which they are taken, both with regards to what the patient brings to the experience in terms of her pre-existing personality, memories, expectations, and intentions, as well as what is outside of her in terms of her relationship with those guiding the experience and other environmental factors such as the music that's listened to. All of the modern trials with psychedelics have used music within their sessions. Music has been a staple component of the psychedelic experience since ancient times. And we found that its effect on people during a psychedelic experience is predictive of the nature of the experiences that they have, which is in turn highly predictive of the longer-term therapeutic outcomes. The psychedelic treatment model is radically different to conventional treatment models in psychiatry. It's neither just a drug treatment nor just a psychotherapy, but rather a synergistic combination of both. The drug induces a state of high plasticity through a particular action on the brain's serotonin system, which, when combined with a particular therapeutic process, enables the natural dismantling of defensive beliefs and behaviors, resetting the mind in a healthier way. Psilocybin has a low toxicity, much lower than alcohol and ketamine, for example. It's rapid acting, but its effects are also enduring, with people reporting benefits days, weeks, months, sometimes years after the drugs left the body. Unlike other drugs of potential misuse, including several legal ones, psilocybin is also not habit-forming, meaning people do not get addicted to it. Also, unlike other drugs, population studies suggest that psilocybin use among the general population is associated with positive rather than negative mental health outcomes, such as significantly lower rates of suicidality. So how are they working? Psychedelics have shown promise for a range of disorders, not just one. So perhaps they target something common to them all. But what might this be? Many people in our trial described feeling disconnected during their illness. They also said that their experiences with conventional care did little to help with this sense of feeling apart from things. Being prescribed SSRIs felt like a palm off, and CBT sometimes felt patronizing. Treatment with psilocybin, on the other hand, was described as feeling fundamentally reconnecting. Reconnecting in a personal sense, in terms of a reconnection to emotions and senses, but also interpersonally in terms of feeling more connected to other people. And finally, participants described a transpersonal reconnection in which they felt connected to a vast universal order, something much larger than them as individuals. Relatedly, participants also described feeling closer to and more appreciative of nature. There's now compelling evidence to suggest that the nature of the experiences people have under a psychedelic mediate the longer-term psychological outcomes. So the key question is, what kind of experiences are important? We have new evidence to suspect that an emotional release or breakthrough may be a critical factor. We've also found that a sense of insight or clarity during the experience is predictive of better outcomes. And finally, a collapse of self-boundaries and a parallel oceanic feeling of oneness also seems to be key. It's the essence of what some people call peak experiences and others spiritual or mystical. Like in infancy, psychedelics appear to work by collapsing our beliefs and assumptions, wiping away our prejudices and biases so that we may go wide-eyed again into this complex and unpredictable world with a renewed openness and willingness to experience and learn. In the words of Isaac Asimov, your assumptions are your windows on the world. Scrub them off every once in a while, or the light won't come in. What I've learned from my research into the healing potential of psychedelics has motivated me to connect with a colleague, Shima Espabodi, to found a new charity, Global Psychedelic Research, or GPR. GPR is motivated by a need to raise funds for psychedelic research and to be free to do this in an independent, scientifically directed, and non-commercially constrained way. GPR is run by scientists at the leading edge of this research area, but it also intends to tackle some of the elitism and individualism of science by democratically involving our supporters in our planning and decision-making. We hope to publish as a collective rather than as individuals, and are committed to principles of open science, such as open access and data sharing. GPR's focus is on the therapeutic potential of naturally occurring psychedelic compounds. The charity will launch with a crowdfunding campaign on the 20th of September this year, 2018, to support an exciting new study using innovative technology to collect data from the ceremonial use of psychedelics throughout the world. This is with the aim of capturing a large and unique data set, which we will be very happy to share with others. Thank you very much for your attention. Shall I sit?
Sit anywhere you like, sir.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was fascinating, Robin. Thank you so much. Now, without putting you on the spot too much, how did you get into this research?
Well, what story shall I tell? I'll tell an honest one. I became immersed in psychology because I was fascinated in people. I guess I wanted to understand myself and other people. And it was psychoanalysis, actually, that I felt offered me the kind of really deep insights that made a lot of sense, and maybe, you know, those insights weren't really there in mainstream psychology, and so that drew me in. And then there was this question of, you know, how do you reach these deeper aspects of the psyche, of the soul, if you want, that are so hard to access, that psychoanalysis proposes are important, very important for our mental well-being and so much of our behavior and thinking. And I felt that the available means, you know, psychoanalysis relies on dreaming and not much else really, free association, but that doesn't really often get deep necessarily.
But are you talking about your own experience of psychoanalysis or training in psychoanalysis?
It started with reading about it, becoming immersed in it intellectually, and then later on having my own analysis, which helped me a lot. But I was frustrated, and there's a certain kind of elitism about psychoanalysis, that it's expensive, not everyone can have it, you know, and that's a real shame. So if there was a way to catalyse the very deep processes of psychoanalysis that can allow you to really, reach those deep aspects of yourself that you perhaps push away, then that could be revolutionary, and it could also be revolutionary in empirically, in a scientific way, demonstrating that some of the principles of psychoanalysis, that there exists an unconscious mind that's much vaster than the conscious mind that we're more aware of, would have a revolutionary effect on psychology and psychiatry in general. And then I discovered literature on psychedelics that it's proposed that that's what they do. And that just made so much sense to me, and always has ever since I discovered that literature.
So it's almost like an evolutionary kind of step in towards the research, in a way, from exploring the depths of the unconsciousness, no?
Yeah, that was the core.
So, what we're all kind of aware of is that this research has been shut down for decades, because this was kind of began in the 50s. And we talk a lot about stigma kind of preventing the open discussion around mental health. What stigma have you encountered in this research and trying to get your kind of work out there?
Well, a huge amount, but it expresses in a sort of insidious way. It's not always shown, because people who have reservations don't always express them. They'll just maybe, not say anything and then trot off when you tell them what you do.
That's a very British response.
No? Some Americans do it too. No, I mean, there's stigma around mental health, which, we're hoping is changing now, and it's brilliant that things like this happen, that people are talking about it. But then stigma around psychedelic drugs, stigma around psychoanalysis. In a way, it's a perfect storm for stigma. And so that's been a challenge, it has. And I've been fortunate to have mentorship that's allowed me to do the kind of creative research that I've wanted to do. And that's made the difference, really. Wonderful
stuff. I loved what you said about psychedelics may work by collapsing our beliefs and assumptions, wiping away prejudice and bias. So is psilocybin a disruptor of fixed patterns of thoughts and behaviour?
Yeah, it seems to be, yeah. And, so much of psychopathology and mental illness rests on those kind of problematic dynamics, that the mind gets stuck or it gets attached to unhealthy things like, an object of addiction, drinking or whatever, or in depression, there's a kind of habitual negative thinking, a habitual pessimism that gets stamped in. And so those heavily stamped in and sort of practiced and habitual behaviors and ways of thinking are just the kind of thing that psychedelics can come in to, with the right kind of contextual support and care to disrupt and dismantle. And a curious thing about psychedelics is it's not just that. There seems to be something intrinsic about the process as well. People describe psychedelic plants as teachers, that they show us things, and it's not really that the therapists are doing the guiding as such. There's something that's almost within us, like the answer's already within us. And psychedelics just dismantle the terrain so that you can see those answers.
So my kind of assumption would be that could lead to a more creative way of thinking as well.
Potentially, and creativity ties in here. People have been exploring psychedelics for that function for a while. There's this thing called microdosing that's going on in Silicon Valley apparently and elsewhere. There's not much evidence to back it up yet, but that's because the experiments haven't been run. So we're going to be doing a study with microdosing in London, and others are around the world, so hopefully we'll have some science to go with the anecdotes soon. Yeah.
When's that happening?
Hopefully in a couple of months. Okay. Yeah.
Have you got the people in for the trials already, or is it
volunteering there? A few, actually. That's the easy part of this research.
Yeah, I can believe it. So, in your kind of presentation, you said that psilocybin is not habit-forming or classically rewarding. Does that also stand, like with microdosing? What happens if you take, a substance for a kind of extended period of time, like psilocybin in particular? Could that then become habit-forming, would you say?
Theoretically, it could. I haven't heard those reports. I haven't heard microdosers saying, God, it's a tough habit to kick. They usually do it, for say a month, and then they stop and recalibrate if you want. So I don't know is the honest answer, because the research hasn't been done. But if you listen, you know, to the word on the street, so to speak, I haven't heard that link that microdoses are taking the LSD often is in a kind of Moorish way. Psychedelics are curious things. They're not classically rewarding. You know, they're not an experience that you might get with, say, alcohol that's more reliably pleasurable. Often the experiences are quite unpleasant. They're challenging, but there's something in that challenge that if you can sort of surrender to it, that can provide all these insights that can be so helpful.
It has a kind of feeling impact, no? A healing impact on you. So although it can be a bit kind of disturbing in a way, and we hear and talk about bad trips, but often it's part of how you're kind of internally healing your psyche, no?
Yeah, we prefer to call difficult experiences difficult or challenging, you know, that there's a challenge there. But the curious thing is, and perhaps the paradox is, that it's only when you surrender to the challenge rather than fight it that the healing potential happens and there's a breakthrough. So
that's a good metaphor for life, no?
Letting go.
So I wonder if I don't know if you saw the article in the Standard recently about the opioid time bomb. I mean, I read it and it made me it really pissed me off. And it pissed me off because there's so much truth in it. And it kind of posed this question, which you're going to receive now, Robin. So in your opinion, is modern psychiatry and mental health, is it purely the product of good science and asking the right questions, or is it about commercial gain now?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I think the honest answer is it's a bit of both, but I think there's too much of industry influence. I mean, if you look at the trials that have been done with SSRIs, for example, the vast majority have been industry sponsored. And then the smaller ones don't have the funding to do anything substantial, really. So there is this massive bias there. Not everything gets published. If industry find negative results, they don't always release that, although hopefully that seems to be changing. But I think too much industry has had an influence, and that's quite a scary thought, that if you're suffering from depression and you really need help, you know, what's out there for you isn't necessarily something that's been driven purely by science. It's been driven by, you know, cost effectiveness and a very strong industry investment.
Okay.
In something that will make those companies a lot of money.
We're running out of time, Robin, I'm afraid to say, but I want to ask you one question and then a little bit about your next trial. In relation to the trials that have happened with end-of-life anxiety, we're all terminal and facing death, so I imagine that psilocybin could be of great value to all of us and a big business, no?
Well, it could be, yeah. Let's hope, you know, the kind of, you know, the good principles that I think are there in psychedelic therapy aren't lost as this does become maybe inevitably commercialized. But end-of-life care is something, as you say, it's something that you know, we're all terminal, and so should this treatment, if it is proven to be effective, as I think it will be more and more, could it be available to anyone who's dying, you know, rather than, say, just being loaded up on opiates, you know, which of course is part of this problem that you were talking about. And that option, you know, perhaps should be available people to have a good death in the same way that we promote having a good life.
Yeah. Could you just very quickly tell us a little bit about your next clinical trial, which I'm really excited about and looking forward to hearing the results?
Yeah, no, happily. So off the back of our little pilot study that I showed you some data on, we're doing a bigger double-blind randomized control trial, and the control condition is a leading SSRI, it's escitalopram. So we're going head-to-head with what the mainstream would say is the best that they've got, more or less. And so they'll get 6 weeks of escitalopram every day, or they'll get just 2 doses of psilocybin, and we'll look at the outcomes from baseline to at this 6-week endpoint, and we'll see what's best. We'll go head to head, and you know, that's the beauty of science.
Watch this space.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, let's see.
So just before we depart, if any people here are interested in your charity or speaking to you more, understanding more about the research you're doing, what do they need to do? How can they get in touch
approach
with you?
me or Shima, who's at the front with me, and we'd be very happy to talk to you about that.
Okay, Robin, thank you so much for coming today. I really appreciate you being here with me and sharing your knowledge and your research with everyone here. Thank you all for coming. Hope you enjoyed it.